So this is module 4, and we're talking about waste versus value. I've already shown you the Ono video. I hope you liked that. That was a little bit different. And we had a little discussion about what value is. So we'll probably focus a little bit more on waste this time. What do you think? When we're focusing on work, we've got three distinct areas that we can focus on. They break out kind of like this. We've got value-adding work, which we hope constitutes the bulk of the work that we do. This is the kind of stuff that actually changes the form, fit, or function of a product, or it satisfies a customer through what they're willing to pay for. Other things are auxiliary work. These are steps in the process that we have to do that don't necessarily contribute to the form, fit, or function, and the customer may not be willing to pay for it. This might be an inspection or something that we just have to do to move something from one place to the next place to get it to the next step in the process. We can't quite get rid of it yet, so it's not value adding, but it's still necessary. And then the third is just waste. Every work process has all three of these. And sometimes because we've been working in them for so long, it's really hard to tell which is which. So we'll spend a little time on that. But you see a pretty high percentage of value adding work, pretty high percentage of auxiliary work, and a pretty low percentage of waste. But I'm telling you, this could be a much more likely distribution of work. I've seen horrible percentages of waste in work processes. And when we get into value stream mapping, you'll see that when you start looking for it, it's just everywhere. But just for now, let's assume that this is our workload, and let's take an example from healthcare. So value adding work might be examining the patients or spending time with patient education, making sure they know everything they need to go home and take care of themselves when they go home. People are willing to pay for those kinds of things. The auxiliary work, though, they don't really care where you have to store the vaccine and the temperature that they have to be stored at. They don't care about that. They don't care about the clean room. They want a clean exam room, but they expect that's just the course of the work. So it's not really value-adding function, but it is absolutely a required function. Taking the time to check the patients in and check the history and check the records. All of those are pretty necessary to give the doctor what they need to make a proper examination and diagnosis. And then scheduling. Okay, people need to get on the schedule. That's not exactly something they want to pay for. And a couple of examples of waste. If you got to get jabbed more than once to get either a shot or a blood sample or an IV, that's waste. And if you're waiting for lab results, that's waste, unless you're burning that time doing something more valuable. Let's take another look at work and value. You see this word, shigoto. If you were listening carefully to the Ono video, you heard him say shigoto. He said, watching machines is not work. And when people are watching machines, we're not doing any shigoto. And just like the Inuit have dozens of words, I just did some research. The 50 words for snow is a myth, but they do have a couple of dozen ways to describe different types of snow. Japan has three key types of waste: Muda, Muri, and Mura. Now let's start with definitions of the Mura. That really just means unevenness. Anytime there are periods in a process where a team member has to speed up and then slow down, and then speed up and then slow down, and then speed up and then slow down, that kind of unevenness puts a lot of stress on people. Now, we can get that from the way we release orders. If we take customer orders in and immediately dispatch them for production without really staging them or anything, then we're going to have some days when we get a whole lot of orders and everybody's working like crazy, and some days when we really don't have anything, and then we end up sending people home. That is the worst example of management that I can think of, is if you're working overtime for 2 weeks and then sending people home the third week or the fourth week because you don't have enough work. That's just crazy. That's uneven. It could also come from assigning different amounts of work to different people in the same cell or on the same line. So we get this imbalance in the cell or the line. It can also come from high variability in the process. And what it does more than anything else is causes stress. And when we're stressed out, we get worse quality, we get worse engagement. Um, we can lose track of what we've done, so we might overproduce, or worse, we might underproduce and then not be able to satisfy a customer order. Don't spend a lot of time, we don't spend enough time really studying the unevenness pieces, but we will in this course. We'll talk about how to overcome this by creating flow and making flow work better. Murray refers to burden. It's the burden that we place on people and equipment while we're getting work done. And we break that down into three specific types. Manual burden talks about the work that we give people to do. If we have work where people are having to bend over a lot, lift heavy loads, twist and reach and work overhead, those are all ergonomically dangerous jobs. And we've got to be able to design that damage or that danger out. This is something we need to focus on every workstation. And a lot of people will just say, well, I've been doing it this way forever. They don't realize that it's an overburden. The second type is machine burden. And this refers to any time we run a machine 24/7 until it breaks. And a lot of people will not admit this, but that's exactly what they do. And in a lot of cases, our accounting systems actually force us to do that kind of stuff because we are trying to pay off that equipment. And we'll hear things like, if that piece of equipment's not running, we're losing money every day. But if that equipment is broken and you don't see it coming, the disruption is much more costly. And then finally, we've got a mental burden that I want you to be aware of. And a lot of people think the mental burden is just the stress, but what it really is decision making. The more decisions we ask operators to make in any given work cycle, the more likely they are to make a mistake. And we've got studies that show that's pretty consistent in pretty much any kind of work environment. So if they've got to decide between two different part numbers that are very similar before they put it on an assembly, then the likelihood that they're going to mess one up is pretty high. So we want to try to design that out, but we don't want to design all the brain power out, because then if you can design all of the thinking out, then you can automate that position and put that person to work someplace where they'll get more value, where they'll be able to contribute their intellectual capacities as well. Be thinking about the number of decisions that the operators have to make at any given time. And we'll tie that into the Yeller promotions work as well. That's one of the rules that we're going to be consistent with in Yeller promotions is one writer, one letter. That's it. Next up is MUDA. That's probably the more famous one. It's general waste. But before we go into discussion about this, I want you to meet somebody. I want you to meet my friend Tim. Tim is just a great guy. He's one of the hardest workers in the company. He has great ideas. He gets along. He's a team player, but we want to eliminate him. Okay, so if you use Tim Wood or Tim P. Wood as your acronym to remember the 7 or 8 different types of waste, and you teach that to people, what we're doing is we're giving human characteristics to the thing that we want to eliminate the most. That just doesn't make sense. So if we turn waste into a human, that reinforces the whole idea that lean is mean, and that it tells people that whether they want to say it or not, it tells people that when we're doing lean improvement activities, we're trying to reduce people. We're trying to eliminate headcount. We're trying to reduce cost. And we go in with this relentless focus on eliminate all the waste we can see. And then you go in and have a conversation with people. Where was the waste yesterday? It's like you're accusing them of wasting your valuable resources. So let's put a little friendlier spin on it and talk about waste in other terms, and focus, when we're talking to them, focus on value. It's really hard to get people engaged when they think their jobs are at risk. So instead of Tim Wood, and actually one of my clients had a continuous improvement coordinator whose name was actually Tim Wood. Crazy. What's the worst, nastiest, grossest thing you can think of? This pit here looks pretty nasty, right? That's what you want to eliminate. And I call it the worm pit. So we use the worm pit as our acronym instead of Tim Wood. And here's what we get: waiting, overproduction, rejects, motion, processing, not just overprocessing, but just about any processing is a candidate for waste if you rearrange some things. I had a client that made kitchen cabinets. They had one building for 100 years. They had a building that turned logs into planks and door panels and things for kitchens. Then it went into the warehouse. And then on the other side of the road, they had a plant that assembled the kitchen pieces. So for 100 years, they took things, they made the door panels and side panels and drawer faces. And the last step was to sand them all to a perfect finish. And then they'd put them on a cart and put them in that warehouse. And if they sit in the warehouse more than a couple of weeks, there's going to be some oxidation. There's going to be some fuzziness. So the first step in the assembly process in the kitchen shop is to sand them again. Well, they rearranged things and released orders so that they only cut in the dimension mill what they needed to build in the kitchen. And when they shipped them straight from the dimension mill over to the assembly mill, how long do you think it took them to stop doing that second sanding operation? Because you're right, for 6 months, they would still do the final sanding in the dimension mill, put it on a cart, send it straight across to the assembly mill, and run it through the sander. It took them 6 months to realize that that process that had been value added for 100 years was now waste. Inventory and transportation. I'm making a bold assumption that you're familiar with a lot of these, but I do have a list of different examples, both in a manufacturing environment and a transactional environment, that you can take a snap of here. I'll also give you the slides as a handout as well. And that's going to wrap up this module.